talking about Rabbi Pharaoh. I had a very peaceful Shabbos. I had a very serene Shabbos. I had a very tranquil Shabbos. When you spend the Shabbos learning Chassidus and teaching Chassidus, it's very, very tranquil. But you do remind me of the wealthy man in a shtetl who decided that his son has a beautiful voice. And since he supported the community was forced to make him the chazan every Shabbos and had to endure years of misery listening to this boy who could barely carry a tune. One day, the greatest cantor of Eastern Europe came to the shtetl. He was one of the most well-known tenors. He had a heavenly voice. He was considered the chazan of all chazan. And the wealthy man brought his child, his son, for what we used to call a probe, for an endorsement by this great tenor. And he tells his son, start singing. And the boy begins singing 1 minute, 2 minutes. After 5 minutes, everybody thought they would fall into chaloshes. I mean, it was so horrible. But the father was kvelling. And he had this boy sing for 45 minutes. And the father is radiating from ear to ear with such nachas. And he finally turns to this great tenor who had an unbelievable voice. He was nebuch blind, but his voice was one in a generation. And he turns to this great blind chazan and he says, "Nu, what do you say about my child, the future Jewish Pavarotti? A talent like no other." And the great tenor, the blind chazan, tells the father, he says, I'll be very, very honest with you. It's been 20 years that I have been blind, unfortunately. This was the first time I wished I was deaf too. My prayer on your behalf for all those who have endured many, many words over the last 24, 28 hours is that you shouldn't extend this prayer after this weekend. So, they tell a story about a immigrant, an Oleh Hadash, from not from the Five Towns or from Toronto or from New York or from Tennessee, but from the Soviet Union in the good old days. 1972, made it out of Khrushchev's country and comes to Israel. This new young journalist who's both writing for Yediot Achronot and reporting for the Israeli TV, is young, a little arrogant, audacious, really wants to make a name for himself. Decides he's going to get a scoop. He's going to have the first interview with this new immigrant from the Soviet Union, and he will really report to the Israeli society about what is happening in Stalin's motherland. So this Oleh Hadash comes off the plane at Ben Gurion Airport, and this young reporter comes over with a mic and says, "Shalom Aleichem, Bruchim Habayim, Aleichem Shalom." He says, "So tell me, how was life in the Soviet Union?" And of course, he's anticipating to hear about the nightmares, so he could report it to the crowd. How was life in the Soviet Union? And the man tells him, to be honest with you, can't complain. It's not what he expected to hear. So he says, and I'll take a different angle, tell me, how was your money situation in the Soviet Union? Your wealth, your parnassus? Couldn't complain. Okay, how were your living quarters in the Soviet Union? He says, can't complain. He says, how was the sense of freedom and liberty and ability to express yourself in the Soviet Union? He says, really? Can't complain. He says, and tell me, how was your sense of safety and personal security? Couldn't complain. So the frustrated journalist looks at him and says, I don't understand. If life there you could not complain about, not your wealth, not your livelihood, not your living quarters, not your freedom, and not your safety, what in the world are you doing here in this country? He says, because here I could complain. I share with you this anecdote because here you could complain, and we complain. We complain all the time. And one of those issues that I was asked to address this evening is marriage, that mooring topic of marriage, the comedy and the Kabbalah. I guess both are spelled with a C or a C and a K, Kuf, which also stands for Kedusha, and Kugel, Kishke, Knishes, and Kreplach, cholesterol. Kabbalah, comedy, okay, so it's a cholent, which is also with a C. So there was another immigrant, this one came from Poland, not to Israel, but to the United States. He didn't know English. He didn't know English. Now you come to Israel not knowing Hebrew, you could survive. You come to America not knowing English, how do you become a citizen? So he asks his friend, how will I become a citizen? So he said, I'll set you up with an interview with a clerk who's been doing this for 50 years. He asks the same 5 questions from everybody. You'll answer the same 5 answers. And you don't have to know English, you'll become a citizen. What are his 5 questions? His first question is always, what's your name? So the moment you hear question number 1, you don't have to understand English. You'll just say, Moshe Weiss. His second question will be, how many kids do you have? You'll say 5. Question number 3, how many states are there in the US? You don't have to understand, you'll just say 50. Question number 4, who was the first president of the US? And when you hear number 4, you'll say George Washington. His 5th question will be, do you have parents? And you'll say, thank God, both. And he'll give you citizenship. Great. So this Hasidic Jew from Poland who doesn't know a word of English sits for 3 weeks and memorizes all these 5 responses verbatim. Moshe Weiss, 5 children, 50 states, etc. The great day comes, he comes into the interview. This old clerk is sitting behind the desk. He turns to him, he says, I just have a few questions to ask. Question number 1, who was the first president of the United States of America? Without skipping a heart's beat, he says, Moshe Weiss. Tell me now, how many states are there in the US? He says 5. Okay, question number 3, how many children do you have? The man says 50. He looks at this Hasidic Jew who has a shtreimel, long payas, white socks, a kapota, bekisha, black pants, a gartel, came from the mikveh, and he says, tell me, what is your name? He says, George Washington. The man on the other side of the desk was an Alta Yidele, he was an old Jew. He understood immediately what is transpiring before his eyes. So he looks at him and he says, so tell me, who is Meshuggah in this room, you or me? Man says, thank God, both. Which of course expresses the notion that, memorizing techniques verbatim can take you to a certain point. But at some point, if you don't internalize certain truths, you will get stuck. If this is true with almost every topic, it's true in relationships. There are many sound bites in relationships in recent years. I mean, there are so many websites and seminars and retreats and workshops and meditations and books and speeches and conferences and kvetching, etc. So there's a lot of sound bites out there. What you do, what you don't do, 797 ways to make believe you're excited, whatever it is. But at some point, if it's just techniques that you could repeat like a parrot, you get stuck. So tonight we want to try to go a step deeper. Be'ezer Hashem, Yisbarech v'Yis'ala. To go one step deeper and understand some of the paradigms. Because this is the rule in life. As long as you're dealing only with symptoms, you're never dealing with the issue. In order to deal with issues, you have to understand the paradigms. You have to go to the boiler of the house. You have to understand what is underlying the edifice. and see what's going on there. We've been speaking of Shabbos, about the feeling that so many people walk around with in a very deep place, that they're inadequate. And every compliment you give them, you think that might enhance the relationship, really is just putting fuel into the fire, because it again reinforces to them that their value is coming from accolades. As long as you don't acknowledge the inner forces that are behind your paralyzing or estranging thoughts, it's very hard to deal with it. I mean, we could put Band-Aids and go to shiurim and hear nice things about relationships and marriage, and it's all good. It's all good. But often we're just putting on Band-Aids. We're taking Tylenol. We're drinking tea with honey, which is a good thing, to drink tea with honey, especially if you have a ragala on the side that's low fat, of course, and an iced coffee to follow. But those are all Band-Aids. You know, I love iced coffee, but it's really not going to heal my issues. Besides your iced coffee, your bataya. So it's important to get to fundamentals, foundational. Now, I'm not advocating here a life in the office of a psychotherapist, although some can use it, trust me. But I'm not saying that for 70 years you should analyze every word that comes out of your mouth, or your wife's mouth, or your husband's mouth, or your children's mouth. There's like this guy who was in therapy for 40 years. He finally goes to the Bahamas on vacation. He sends a postcard to his psychiatrist, and it read this: "I'm here in the Bahamas. I'm having an unbelievable time. I wish you were here to tell me why." We don't live life in the world of analysis. We live life in the world of action, of life. Life is about a dance. It's a dance. And when you're dancing, you don't take out a manual and say, let me see how to dance. If you're always with a manual, you'll never dance. You have to dance. Ashira Lashem b'chayai. Life is a dance. A dance has many different movements, many different experiences. There's a dance that Tzemach Tzedek calls panim b'panim, acher ba'acher. There's the dance when you face each other, and then there's the twirl. When you don't face each other, it's back to back, which is also part of a dance. It's taka back to back, but it's a hachana, it's a preparation to get back face to face. It's a very powerful metaphor for life. We're always in a dance. We're in a dance with ourselves, with God, with the world, with history. The dance is sometimes gewaldige music and sometimes difficult music, exhilarating symphony or an introspective ballad, whatever it may be, but it's a dance. And the manual can't always be, okay, let's analyze this. I think that's a name of something. Let's analyze that. I mean, you know the story about this guy who never left his mother's home. Why did he not leave his mother's home? Two reasons. First of all, he loved his mom. And second, he loved his cat. And the cat was living with his mom. So mom and the cat would get to bond for like 15 years, 24 hours a day. Finally, his friends and his brother tells him, you can't do this to yourself. You know, you need oxygen. I mean, mom is a great lady, and the cat is a lovely cat, but you need to breathe. You know, book yourself a ticket, go away for 2 weeks, and then you'll come back refreshed. He says, I don't understand. I didn't get married because of this cat. I didn't leave mom's house because of this cat. You want me to go on vacation? He says, yeah, for the sake of mom and for the cat and yourself, you need to reinvigorate yourself. After nudging him for a year, he agrees to go for 2 weeks on vacation, not before his brother promised that he would move into mom's house to take care of the cat, and of course to take care of mom. Okay, so this guy finally books his ticket. He goes to the Caribbean. He has a 5-star hotel, mamash on the ocean. He lands, he gets into the suite, he unpacks the first time in decades. He's been out on a vacation, gewaldig. As he's ready to settle into his room, the phone rings. Picks up the phone, it's his brother. His brother says, my dear brother, the cat, Yiskadal, Yiskadash, the cat is dead. What? For years, I've been nurturing the cat. Benafshi, Kshura, Benafsha. I go away for 6 hours, It's dead? The brother says, yes. Alav HaShalom. What happened? Cat ran out of the house, went into the street, truck came, ran it over. Alav HaShalom. The poor man breaks down, weeping profusely for 20 minutes. Can't come back to himself. Finally, after 20 minutes, he relaxes. Somewhat, gains his composure, tells his brother, you know, I have to give you a tutorial about basic human interaction. You know how much I love the cat. You don't call me and say, Yiskadal v'yiskadash, the cat is dead. Where's your menschlichkeit? Efa ha'enushiyut shelcha. Efa ha'regishut shelcha. Can I move here? Where's your sensitivity? He says, what did you want me to do? He says, you should have called me and said, the cat ran up to the roof. Okay. Tomorrow you call me and you say, the cat went to the rim of the roof. The next day you call me and you say, we can't get the cat off the roof. The next day you call me and tell me the firemen and the police department are here and the cat refuses to move. The next day you tell me, unfortunately, the cat fell. That way, for 5 days, I could begin to prepare, but that's how you introduce it. The cat is on the roof, and then I can adjust to this new reality in my life. You get it? Brother says, I get it, I apologize, and I promise that from now on, I will be much more sensitive. He says, okay, so now tell me, how is mom? So he says, mom is on the roof. So you see, my dear friends, now that's a good one, right? So you see, my dear friends, I can teach somebody from today till tomorrow, rigishut, enushiyut, how to speak, how to communicate, how to say things when you come home, when you don't come home. But in life, sometimes it's either you get it or you don't get it. And some people just don't get it. And in order for them to get it, you have to go to the boiler. You have to go to the system inside. You have to go to a deeper place. So again, life is not about analysis. Life is about dancing. But if I'm dancing and I'm self-conscious throughout the dance, and I can't dance freely, and I can't dance openly, and I can't dance with joy and with passion and with individuality and with creativity, because I'm living in a fog. Fog is a Rosh Tevis, according to Kabbalah. Fog is a Rosh Tevis. Fear, obligation, guilt. Got it? Fear, obligation, guilt. Please send them my love. If it's my wife, tell her how great I am. Okay, so when you're living in a fog, it's still Shabbos. If it's my mother-in-law, tell her how great I am. It's still Shabbos in Pittsburgh? Really? Even for my mother-in-law? Okay. So some marriages are in a fog, meaning most decisions and behaviors are motivated either by fear or by obligation. I always feel coerced. Or, this is the biggie, guilt. Guilt. And we're all good at that. We're good at fear. We're good at obligation. We're good at guilt. Sometimes these things make us do good things, like listen to our wives. However, it's still living in a fog. It's true with Judaism. If all of my Judaism, or most of it, is motivated by fear, fear of this world or fear of the world to come, a sense of coercion and a sense of guilt, my Judaism is a fog. It's in a fog. In Hebrew, it's called arafel. Arafel. And it's painful. It's painful to live life in a fog. So, forgive me for changing the subject. We'll get back to it. There was a man named Ramak. You know who the Ramak was? Rabbeinu Moshe Cordovero. Ramak lived in Sfas, passed away in the year 1570. Chav Gimel Tammuz, right? We're at Sfas next. Chav Gimel Tammuz, Shin Lamed, 1570. Ramak had a student for a short time, Rabbeinu Yitzchak Luria, the Arizal. When the Ramak passes away, the Arizal teaches Kabbalah for 2 years, passes away at the age of 36 or 38. 2 years later, in 1572, on Hay of, both are interred quite close to each other, mamish close to each other, in the holy city of Tzfas. Ramak and Arizal. Rabbeinu Moshe Cordovero is considered the greatest Kabbalist because he is the one who took the whole Chachmas HaNistar and really turned it into an encyclopedic form. In his brilliant books, Pardes, Reminding the Orchard of Pomegranates, and other books, Talacharima and Talmud Voira, his commentary on Zoyar, Oirachama. What he did, especially in the Pardes, the orchard, was he took all the wisdom of Kabbalah and systemized it. So if you want to know something about Atzilus or about the Sfiros, he went to the Ramak's book and he gave you all the information, and he also tried to reconcile contradictions between the Zohar and the Boyer and Sefer Yetzirah and Tikkunim and all the writings that existed in Kabbalah till his day. Nobody knew what's coming next. What happened next was the Arizal, who in 2 years, literally revolutionized the entire landscape of Kabbalah to the point of completely unrecognizable. In 2 years, transcribed by his primary student, Reb Chaim Vital, all of his works, Eitz Chaim and the 8 Portals, Shmoyne Sha'arim, and all the other students of the Arizal. But there's one item in which the contrast was seen in a very powerful way. To quote a line of the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Chabad Rebbe, one of his discourses, it comes even from earlier, Haramak Zal Lo Yoda Me'inyan HaTzimtzum. Rabbi Moshe Cordovero did not discuss, did not explore the phenomenon called Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is not a Chinese dish. Tzimtzum is an idea introduced by the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, in the 16th century. Till the Arizal, that phenomenon, that idea, that concept of Tzimtzum was not discussed. The Arizal is the one who introduces it. What is this concept of Tzimtzum? So suffice it at a Malka at this hour to summarize it very concisely as thus. Here's the question. The question is, what would you say? Would you say that creation was an act of self-expression on the part of God, or creation was an act of self-forgetfulness on the part of God? Or, when an artist creates an amazing piece of art, would you say that that is an act of self-expression? When an architect builds a tremendous, a gorgeous mansion, when an artist, a musical artist, writes a tremendous, extraordinary, splendid symphony, when a writer, a novelist, completes his novel, these are all acts of self-expression, right? He or she is expressing their wisdom, talent, genius, creativity, individuality, beliefs, passion, philosophy, ideology, emotions through these works, through the music, or the art, or the structure, or the speech, or the book, or any other form of self-expression. The athletic in his basketball game, and the weightlifter in his weightlifting, and the boxer in boxing, etc. Wouldn't it then be logical to say that the world, the creation of the world, was an act of self-expression, self-actualization? In the words of David HaMelech, Ma'rabu ma'asecha Hashem, ma'godlu ma'asecha Hashem, ma'oid omku machshevosecha. Look, after 5,000 years, we still haven't mastered the secret of a single cell, a single atom. We're still trying to unravel the mysteries of the Jinnam. Never mind of the universe. We still haven't mastered the depth in a single blade of grass, or a beating heart, or the miracle of digestion. We scratch the surface. We scratch the surface, and every year it's dazzling to see what's coming out, especially in the last few years, especially in the world of genes, of biology, of the miracle of creation of the human body, in the world of physics, dazzling. So when I express myself, I may express myself through doing what I think I'm good at. And the same is true with any artist in his or her field. When God expresses himself, we have a universe. That was the notion till the Arizal. That's what the Ramak spoke about. They called it Ilah va'alul. Ilah va'alul meant Ilah is the source, and Alul is the expression of that source. So from every Ilah comes a different Alul. From the seed of an apple tree, from the seed of an apple, that's the Ilah, the Alul will be an apple tree. From the egg and the seed of a human being comes a fetus, etc. From God, from the ultimate Ilah, comes the Alul, which are all the seeds and the entire universe. It was the Arizal who suddenly introduced a completely new notion. And his notion was, it's the other way around. Creation is not an act of self-expression. Creation was an act of self-forgetfulness. Creation, more than self-expression, it necessitated God to deny himself, to repress himself, to suspend himself, to negate himself. It was an act of self-transcendence, if you will, not of self-actualization. When the artist writes a symphony, plays a symphony, he or she is expressing their talent, their passion, their depth. Hopefully they are. When God created the world, Arizal says it's the other way around. What was necessary for him was to stifle his expression. Why? So the way he puts it, or his student puts it in the opening of his magnum opus called Eitz Chaim, the Tree of Life, and I'll quote, for those who are going to do homework and check me up afterwards to see if I'm accurate. So he says, before the world was created, which means God is the embodiment of infinity. If infinity expresses itself, it excludes any other existence. If infinity emerges, there's no room, there's no space, physically and primarily conceptually, for anything outside of infinity. Because if there's room for something outside of infinity, then it's not infinite. Infinite means it pervades and penetrates everything. Every concept, every time, every space, every milieu, every spiritual reality, every physical reality, every conceptual reality, every paradoxical reality is pervaded by the infinite Oirein Sof, the presence of infinity. In order to create an existence called a universe, then, the first thing God had to do was not express himself. He had to actually hide, conceal, repress, suppress, suspend. This is called Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is the first act of withdrawal. All withdrawal symptoms you learn about in psychology have their genesis in the first withdrawal. The withdrawal was Tzimtzum, where the Infinite One withdrew, so to speak, his infinite presence, creating a chalal u'makom panui, an empty space, and in that empty space, there is now room for existence. All the worlds emerged into that empty space, the void of his infinite presence. Creation, in other words, does not begin with self-expression. It begins with complete self-suspension and self-forgetfulness. There's no expression of him. On the contrary, it's him creating room for something else, for something other, for something outside. A very different notion of expression. We thought, okay, this is the Arizal. Now started a new question. is Tzimtzum Kipshutai or Shalo Kipshutai? The first generation after the Arizal, a major conflict emerged among the Kabbalists. Did the Rebbe mean it literally, the Arizal? Did he mean it literally, or did he mean it metaphorically? Did he mean Tzimtzum Kipshutai? God created an empty space where the infinite present is not there. He may supervise it, he may overlook it, he may analyze it, he may care about it, but he's not there. Or Tzimtzum Shelo Kipshuto. The Arizal did not mean it literally. He meant that it's perceived as infinity is not there. But even in that space, you have the whole presence, the whole infinity. Now today, to introduce that other philosophy would be a little strange, because everybody agrees to that simple but deep song. Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. But let me tell you, not all Jews agreed with that once upon a time. Today it's like a given. You had some of the greatest. There was a Jew, Rabbi Amnuel Chai Riki, the author of Mishnas Hasidim, the author of Yosher Levav, who believed Tzimtzum was Kipshutai. No other person as great as the Vilna Gaon himself embraced the notion of Tzimtzum Kipshutai, even though his student, Reb Chaim Volozhiner in Nefesh HaChaim, embraced that notion of Tzimtzum Shelo Kipshutai. It was the Baal HaTanya, the Alter Rebbe Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who dedicated much of his work, particularly in the second section of Tanya Shara Yichud Ve'emunah, to decry the notion that Tzimtzum is Kipshuto, that it's literal. Rather, it doesn't mean literal, it means it's perceived to our eyes that we're living in a finite world separate from infinity. But if I could quote these lines, if only the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear as is. Ein Sof, infinite. It's about doors of perception, expansion of consciousness, and really seeing beneath the veil of the finite. Okay, so any student of Kabbalah or serious student of Hasidus, if you're not only nashing, you know, a vertical here, a vertical there, if you're a serious student, you're familiar of how central this conversation is. But the Baal HaTanya taught something else. And that is, the entire purpose of the drama of the creation of the cosmos was in order for human life on earth. So every notion in Torah about existence is mirrored and reflected in the human condition. Nasa Adam b'tzalmeinu kidmuseinu means not only we're just in his image, in the sense that the human being is a great creature, but that every reality in the world of godliness is mirrored in the psychological and biological structure of the human condition, which really means that the study of the human biology and human psychology from the Hasidic perspective is a study of God. Or as the Baal HaTanya quoted the verse of Iyov of Job, Mipsari echze Eloka, from my flesh I shall perceive God, that from the very human condition you can discover the structure that God set up in his own relationship with the cosmos. And I would like to demonstrate how these three notions, number one, the concept, understanding of creation till the Arizal, the Ramah. Number two, the shift of the Arizal. And number three, the argument, if he meant it Kipshuto, and the resolution that Shelo Kipshuti, which has been embraced by the Baal HaTanya, and I think today by all of Klal Yisrael, at least of what I'm aware, because as I said, even Reb Chaim Volozhiner went that way, how these are reflected in our condition. Particularly, I want to focus on the world of relationships. All relationships, but of course, a relationship which is often complicated because it's intense, known as marriage. And in order to explore this, albeit briefly, I want to take a story that everybody knows, and probably most of us grew up with, including myself, and we read it every year, and we just read it 2 weeks ago, literally. And from childhood, it's always struck me as quite enigmatic and really incomprehensible. Until today, even though we hear it so many times, if you're just attentive when they read the Torah, you just listen to it, and you listen to it with the music, tashma, as the Gemara likes saying, come and hear. One, I think, is surprised each year anew by the developments of these events. And I'm referring to the marriage from which we all come from, more or less, namely the marriage of our third patriarch, Yaakov, in Parshas Vayetze. Yaakov runs from his brother. He comes to a well in Mesopotamia called Haran in eastern Turkey today. We know exactly, or more or less, where it is. There's still a region in southeastern Turkey called Haran. And Yaakov comes to a well. He sees this beautiful, lovely young woman named Rachel. Rachel hayta yifas toar v'yifas mara. Rachel had an older sister, Leah. Ve'ene Leah rakos. The eyes of Leah were weak. Rashi says she wept a lot. Rachel was beautiful in her toar, her mara, physique, countenance, geval. Vayev Yaakov es Rachel. Yaakov really cherishes, loves Rachel. He offers her father his hand. He offers his father 7 years of labor to give him Rachel's hands in marriage. Lavan agrees. 7 years later, the time is up, and you all know what happened at that wedding. Lavan makes a switch between Rachel and Leah. Yaakov comes home after the wedding, goes into the tent. It's before Edison's days. There's no electricity. Nobody bothered to light a candle. Yaakov consummates his marriage not with Rachel, but with Leah. Vayehi b'boker. Dawn breaks. Sun rises. Yaakov takes a look and he says, whoops, it's the wrong one. Comes running to his father-in-law and says, Lamari mitani, why did you deceive me? And his father-in-law says, of course, it's immoral to marry over the older sister before the younger sister, which is, by the way, how you know you're dealing with a genuine crook. You come complaining about how he deceived you, and he makes you feel guilty at the end of the conversation. Yaakov leaves Lavan. Can I marry Rachel too? Sure, you can marry Rachel. After the week is over, for another 7 years of labor, Yaakov decides to stick it out with Leah, marries Rachel too, and the Torah says, Vayehav gam es Rachel mi Leah. He loves also Rachel, but more than Leah. Vayar Hashem kisnua Leah vayiftach et Rachel. God saw that Leah was unloved, as the Radak wants to translate snua, and he opened her womb, and history continues. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. Today we spoke about Reuven, etc., but the story continues. And I always ask myself the question, why did this happen? Why did the Hashgacha have it that Yaakov married the wrong woman? I mean, I'm going to ask the men sitting in this room, imagine it happened to you. Imagine you get married. You wake up in the morning, you take a look at your son, and you see your mother-in-law. Or your sister-in-law. What an enigmatic tragedy. Really. And not only that, think about it. This wasn't an isolated marriage in Timbuktu. This was the marriage that constitutes the foundation of Klal Yisrael. Every person sitting in this room probably is a descendant, probably of Leah, most of us of Leah, maybe of Rachel. But what that means is that the first family of the founding fathers and mothers of our people, that marriage that created the genesis of the Jewish people, was a mistake. Maybe this is where some of our issues come from. Maybe this is where some of our family dysfunction should be traced back to. What perturbs one even more is the fact that at every wedding that you have been to, there's what's called badekanish, where the chassan veils the kala. And if you'll ask why, one of the answers will be because Leah was veiled at the night of her wedding, which is why Yaakov didn't see her. My question then is, we should have a custom at every wedding that the chassan unveils the kala so he can make sure that it's the right one. And yet under the chuppah, when he places that fateful ring on her finger and says, Hareyat mikudeshet li, arguably the most important moment of marriage, the creation of the marriage. He does not see her. She does not see him. For all he knows, it could be Queen Elizabeth. Or Hillary. I don't know. But don't you think when I'm marrying you, I should get to see you, and you should get to see me? No. Sorry. Now, at least if you're at the weddings, you know, they have these little tiny thin veils, mainly. But you come to these weddings where they have these veils, you know, that's thick, you know, Dalet Amas al Dalet Amas, it's kosher for schach. You know, at least in schach you can see the stars, maybe. Here, you don't see anything. And she doesn't see anything. And they're telling you, don't trip, there's a step, Yesh madregapa, no, pick up the gown, pick up the gown. Are we telling her that in order to remain married to this guy, you'll have to be blind? I just thought of that. Maybe that's the reason. That's Mama should do one. Mama just thought of it. You know? I agree with that interpretation, but then we should also plug her ears. Because to really succeed, she has to be deaf too, let's face it. Not see and not hear, and then you're fine. What's even more strange in this story is, Yaakov is buried with whom? With Leah, not with Rachel. Not with the one he chose, but with the one he ended up with by mistake. Ma'aras HaMachpelah has Yaakov and Leah together for 3,700 years. Rachel is alone in Bethlehem. Not only that, Rachel passed away very young. Yaakov lives most of his life with Leah, not with Rachel. Some of the women are crying, and the men are like, what is he getting at? You're supposed to marry each other, that's the funny thing. The man is thinking, that was a good joke about the cat, let me remember that. And she's like, oh, you poor Rachel. Okay, and I'm in the middle. Supposed to make shalom. So, what do we say? Utas Kislin. Chashav Hashem is Roya Katsha. At a certain point in Golus, Rebbeinu Shalom realized that he has to give his people a certain depth in Torah that was not revealed to them. It was always there, but it was not revealed. And that was the depth of Kabbalah, and then even more Chassidus. So if you study the writings of Kabbalah and Chassidus, a new pattern emerges in the story of Rachel and Leah. And when we understand that pattern, I think we can go back and apply it literally to our marriage. In Kabbalah and Chassidus, 6 things. Kabbalah, everything is code language. In Chassidus, it's explained and clear, especially in Chabad Chassidus. However, then comes our job to apply it to real life. To real life. So let's see what it says in Kabbalah, Chassidus, and then apply. So the Zohar says, Leah is Alma de Iskasya, and Rachel is Alma de Isgalia. Leah is the hidden world, and Rachel is the revealed world. I would translate it in simple English today, or profound English. Leah is the unconscious, Rachel is the conscious. The 2 sisters in Chumash are not only 2 sisters who lived in Mesopotamia 3,500 years ago. No characters in Chumash are only historical figures. Cain and Hevel, Yaakov and Esav, Yosef and his brothers, Yitzchak and Yishmael, Rachel and Leah, Vashti and Esther. All the characters are not just individuals who lived at a certain point in history. They're also that. They're also that. But most importantly, they each capture characteristics that live on timelessly within the human psyche. So that their stories are our stories. Every personality explored in the Torah from the Zoharic perspective embodies a psychological feature or features that live on in history. Hence, when we read their narratives, we are reading our own personal autobiographies, our own narratives. Their stories are our stories. Their struggles are ours. Their triumphs are ours. In the words of the Zohar, the word Torah doesn't mean history, it means teaching. Torah miloshen hayra. Every story recorded there is a lesson. It's a teaching. It's an instruction for life. It's a manual for living. It's God's blueprint of how to navigate the turbulent journey we call planet Earth, we call life. Rachel and Leah, Alma de Iskalia, Alma de Skasi. The Zohar says that's why Leah was buried in a cave below the earth. Alma de Iskasia, the unconscious. Rachel, it says, was buried on the ground, and the Matseva is above her. The tomb is above her. Alma de Iskalia. Let's take this one step further. The Balatanya writes, what does Rachel mean in Hebrew? Right, a ewe, a sheep. What does the Navi Yeshaya says? Ki Rachel lifnei gozezeh ne'elama. Like a sheep silent in the presence of those who shear her wool. Rachel is from the family, it's called the ewe, it's the sheep family. Comes Rabbi Menachem Azariah of Fanu, the Rameh Mipanu, the great Italian Kabbalist, and writes in his work, Rachel is the gematria of 238, the same numerical value as the words in Bereshis, Vayihi Or, and there was light. So Rachel is the sheep, and the gematria, there was light. What does the word Leah mean? The word Leah, we have it in Shmois, after the Malka of blood. V'nil'u Mitzrayim lishtot mayim min hayaor. What does that mean? The Egyptians became weary, exhausted. Nil'ah, Leah means exhaustion, tired. What is this telling us? What it's telling us is that Rachel and Leah embody two dimensions of the human psyche. Rachel is the conscious, Leah is the unconscious. Rachel are those components of the human psyche that are filled with light. When Rachel comes into a room, everyone says, Vayihi Or. She is the light of the party, the life of the party. Rachel's journey in life was more or less a serene cruise through tranquil waters. Rachel is a sheep. Sheep are calm, gentle, submissive, sensitive. Their voices arouse compassion. Even children who have, or adults who have sensory integration issues, I think sheep is probably the easiest animal for them to touch because they don't offer resistance. Sheep represents, they're calm, they're cool, they just behave, they're just fine animals. You ever dealt with goats? It's a whole different system. In English too, we talk about sheep, we talk about goats, in all languages as certain personalities. Rachel represents what's called in Chassidus Avodas HaTzadikim. She represents that wholesome human being who feels wholesome, sees the world as a wholesome place, and their journey is one of inner peace and tranquility and serenity. You look at them and you see a bright, light, appealing sheep, Vayihi Or. It's those parts of your psyche that are attractive. Yifas Toyar, Yifas Mara. It's what you write on your resume when you want to get a job. You write about your great qualities, your great attributes. It's what your friends tell you they like about you. Or they should tell you they like about you. Leah means exhausted. Who is she? Why would you name a girl exhausted? It's true, most women are exhausted. And for good reason. When you have to put up with what you put up. I would also be exhausted. It depends who. You have a shlemiel, you have a shlemazel, you have a nudnik. Shlemiel pours the soup on the shlemazel. The nudnik wants to know what type of soup was it. But how about when you get a guy who pours the soup on himself and wants to know what type of soup it is? You have all three converge. I would also be exhausted. Well, why would I name her exhaustion? Leah was exhausted, not because she worked hard. She worked hard, but she was exhausted from herself. Some people are tired from being themselves because she was a very complex person. Not because she was less smart than Rachel, but she was much deeper. She was in touch with her unconscious. And trust me, if you're in touch with your unconscious, you're exhausted. You see, our brain creates a lovely filter, and it only allows trickles of our unconscious to come into our conscious, knowing what we can deal with. But if that filter is expanded, oh my God, life gets interesting. You know, as I told, when somebody, I think I said it, when somebody asks you a question, you know, the first thing somebody asks me, I answer them, you know, should I tell you what you want to hear, or should I tell you the truth? If you want me, we can speak through filters, that's fine. Do you want to hear the truth? Or do I even know the truth? But in the unconscious, there's a lot. There's a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of unbelievable good stuff. On the contrary, you've been speaking over Shabbos, in the unconscious, you have that nefesh hashemis, which is chelik elakami mal. But the unconscious also takes you to your primal places. How many of you have visited your primal places? You don't have to raise your hand. But how many of you even know that you have a primal place? Well, if you've ever visited your primal place, there's lots of tears there. Lots of tears. So Leah cried. Leah cried. Leah is the quintessential paradigm of Baal Tshuva. Baal Tshuva is not what we call Baal Tshuva and FFB. There's the BT Baal Tshuva and FFB verblundert from birth. I'm not referring to the classifications in culture. This guy was born in Lakewood, and this guy was born in Wyoming. You know? And put on tefillin at NYU, and that was the rest is history. I'm talking about, you could be an FFB and a Baal Tshuva, and you could be a Baal Tshuva and unfortunately become an FFB. It happens constantly. Not in Ramat Beit Shemesh. But it happens. What I mean is, it's not about where you grew up or how you lived or how observant you are. It's your attitude it's your relationship with God, it's your relationship with yourself. The tzaddik is born into a wholesome psyche. And the Baal Tshuva struggles. The Baal Tshuva struggles with thoughts, with different thoughts, with instincts, with emotions about the self, about the other, about the world, about life, about God. That's exhausting. Leah was very, very deep. The Baal HaTanya says in a Maimer, I think Tovkuf Ayin Beis, the last year of his life, if I'm not mistaken, he says, Vayar Hashem kisnua Leah, unbelievable. Why was Leah hated? You know what he says? Because people, I quote, hate things that they can't wrap their brain around. We don't like things that we don't understand. When I meet somebody that I can't classify, I dismiss them as a meshugana. I can't talk to them. Because it doesn't somehow fit into my paradigm, my box. I like when things, you know, I can make a seder, it's like a puzzle. And Leah was very, very deep. And when you meet that, it's like, it's scary. Unless you're ready to be vulnerable, it's scary. It's fearful. You don't want to go there. I don't want to go to my primal places. I don't want to go there. I already made a life of cover-ups. It's working for me. Thank you. Thank you.